Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode for the rest of the conference. If you have a question, please submit it into the chat. I would like to inform all parties that today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the conference over to Marcia Seigel. Thank you. You may begin.
Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are. This is Marcia Seigel. I'm the Deputy Director for Policy and Programs for the Cdfi Fund. I'm pleased we have, again, robust participation in today's webinar. Thank you so much for your interest and enthusiasm about the ERP. This is the last webinar that we're going to be holding. All of the webinars that we held are recorded and available to you. As many of you know, we recently published supplemental FAQs, frequently asked questions, for the program to help you with your application. So give you information that you may need and clarify things that you may need to clarify. I know that many of you, because I've seen many of them, are submitting service requests to speak about your specific situations and get input or clarification. I encourage you to continue to do that. We will respond as soon as we can. As you know, the deadline for this application is September 22nd, and we hope that this extension that we provided has helped you as well. Today we're going to go through some highlights of the FAQs, things we want to highlight for you, and then we will take questions in each section. Dan will break for that. I'm going to introduce him in a minute. And at the end, we will also have just open time for questions. So I encourage you to put them in the chat. The team is on and listening, and I'm going to turn this over to Dan Aiello, who is my senior advisor, the senior advisor to the Deputy Director for Policy and Programs, and he has been conducting these webinars for you and doing a great job. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan, and we will cover a lot, I think, this time. Go ahead, Dan.
Thank you, Marcia. Welcome, and thanks, everyone, for joining us. The purpose of this, not really a webinar, it's more of an FAQ session, is to go over our supplemental frequently asked questions that were produced and see if anyone else has any questions. As a reminder, this is the Cdfi Fund ERP website. We had produced an initial frequently asked questions document that was released at the initial program launch. We have since released a supplemental frequently asked questions that hopefully all of you had a chance to review. I'm going to open that document now. Please be sure to reference both FAQ documents if you have a question. And so, unfortunately, it is opened on page 17 or 18. So let me scroll back up to the top. Okay, so we based this supplemental frequently asked questions document on a number of questions that we received through service requests, our previous webinars, and through other forums since we have opened the program. This is not necessarily meant to cover every question anyone might have about the program, just the ones that we've gotten frequently. If you have remaining questions, you can ask them by entering messages in the chat, or you can always submit a service request at a later point in time. So I'm going to start just by walking through the document. I'm going to go section by section. As you can see, there are a number of different sections, and I'm just going to highlight major FAQs we added based on kind of the number of people who were interested in that topic. And then I'll pause in each section to see if anyone has any questions, either about the supplemental FAQs or residual questions on that topic. And you can enter them in the chat. If we don't get any questions, we'll just move to the next section. If we get some questions, I'll try to answer them. We'll also have time at the end for questions that maybe don't fall into any of these categories or that you didn't get a chance to ask earlier in the webinar. We're going to try to keep this to about an hour. It could be a little less if folks don't really have questions. So let's dive in. So we issued some various clarifications on applicant eligibility. There was a question here related to determining whether you're an affiliate of another CDFI. As you all should know, affiliated CDFIs are not allowed to apply separately under the CDFI program. We have a specific definition of affiliate in our materials. And so you need to make that determination yourself. We also got a number of questions as to whether applicants can provide reviewed financial statements in place of audited financial statements. And the answer to that is no. We are requiring 2 years of audited financial statements. If you regularly get your financial statements audited and your most recent historic fiscal year audit is not complete, as of the application deadline, you can submit unaudited financials for the most recent historic fiscal year. Mostly this is going to apply to folks with 12/31 fiscal year ends that are getting a single audit that may not be ready until September 30th. So in that case, you can provide audits for the 2 previous historic fiscal years rather than the most recent one. But we are requiring 2 audits from everyone as a condition of eligibility. But, you know, the change in policy or from some of the earlier materials, it's really a clarification is that, you know, you're not penalized if your audit is still in process for the most current year. You can accept the 2 most recently available audits instead. And then there's also a question about folks who have less than a 5-year operating track record and how that impacts their eligibility. Does anyone have any questions? I recommend that you submit your questions through the chat, either to everybody or to all panelists. The host, I believe, is me, but all panelists probably more effective in terms of making sure we see it. I'll just pause for a second to see if there are any other questions on program eligibility. Then we'll move to geographic eligibility. All right. Seeing no questions, I will move on to the next section, which is geographic eligibility in the supplemental FAQs. I also, yes, so sorry, we got a couple questions. The audit requirement refers to unregulated entities. Regulated entities are exempt from the audit requirement. So, all right, we're going to keep going, and all right, so I'm going to take a couple questions. If we make grants to a city government and we know their projects are in ERP geographies, how do we determine if they are minority owned or controlled? By the makeup of the city council or by the mayor? The documents describe businesses and nonprofits, not municipalities. So that's an interesting question. In general, we'd ask you to submit a service request on that. It would depend if the loan is made directly to municipality or if it's made to a municipal controlled corporation. So if it's made to a municipal controlled corporation, then you could rely on the board of that corporation. Directly to municipality, we need a service request when you think about it. All right, I had one person say they're having trouble hearing me. Are other folks having trouble hearing me? Okay. Sound good. Okay. That appears to be a limited issue. If you're having trouble connecting via phone, you may be able to connect via internet, or I will try dialing back in. All right, I'm going to move on to geographic eligibility. All right, so we had a question about 2010 and 2020 that's been provided. Also questions about applicant eligibility requirements related to the 5 most recent historical fiscal years. So there have been some clarifications provided on that topic. How to geocode things, also clarifications on determining eligibility if you're a CDFI that lends or invests in other CDFIs, an intermediary lender. There's also an important clarification provided on federally designated tribal service counties and whether they're considered eligible native areas. They are. However, these areas aren't included in the native area data layer in SIMS. So lending to tribal members located within federally designated tribal service counties or service areas is considered lending within native areas per our definition of native area. But unfortunately, that data is not available in SIMS because it's partially related to tribal membership. So you need to rely on your own records for that. Okay. This document, if you would like to follow along, is available on our website. I will try to zoom in a little bit, but if you're having trouble seeing it, please just open it. It's available on our website. It's right here, number 6. All right, let me answer my next set of questions. When we're determining the amount of loans closed in each historic year, should we use the same criteria we would use for the TLR report? For example, if a loan is refinanced, we would not include it as a new loan closed unless the loan amount increased, in which case we would only include the amount of the increase in the new loan. Yes. In general, you would use the same criteria you would use for the TLR reports. You do want to make sure that your portfolio amounts and other things match what you put in the TLR. It's possible that we will be doing some sampling and some comparison between data entered and what we have in the TLR for folks that submit a TLR. So it'd be to your benefit to make sure that data aligns. All right, I'm going to skip some questions unrelated to geographic eligibility. There are, and then I'll come back to them later. Someone noted there are discrepancies between the published data sets in the maps and SIMS with regard to persistent poverty counties. We are investigating that issue, and once we discover the results, we are going to make sure that is clear in terms of the data set that should govern. So, in general, persistent poverty counties is the same that we've been using in other programs for a number of years. But we're just trying to figure out why it would be appearing differently in SIMS, considering it's the same data set we've been using for years. For tribal service areas, will we need to submit records demonstrating the service areas in the application? No, you don't need to submit records as part of the application. However, we're advising all applicants to retain documents substantiating their eligibility per the 30% in ERP eligible geographies criteria. We reserve the right, and we may request your documentation on how you establish that you're eligible for the program as part of our due diligence in application assessment. But that's not something we're asking for up front. All right, going forward, there are some questions that are not related to geography or geocoding, so I'm skipping those, but I will try to come back to them. In item K, in the updated FAQ document, can you clarify the intent of this question with the expectation that one of these figures is supposed to be higher than the other? Item K. All right, well, we haven't gotten to K yet, so I'll get to that. Again, folks, I'm going to take these in the order they come. All right, so we don't seem to have any more questions about geocoding or geographies. To complete, so other guidance we've issued on geocoding, we issued some guidance on how to geocode multiple locations, both in terms of prorating the dollar amount and determining whether the transaction is attributable to ERP-eligible geographies. There's a question about random sampling, which we are not allowing. All right, so then there are other various questions on the calculation of track record. There is this question clarifying how to respond to question 11D. If you have those questions. And this, I think we got a question about. Can you clarify the intent of this question? Is the expectation that one of these figures is supposed to be higher than the other? So question 11D says, did the applicant increase the dollar volume and or number of transactions of financial products flowed and grants made to ERP-eligible geographies in the 2 years that followed March 2020 as compared to the 3 years that preceded March 2020? So yes, we're asking if on an annual or quarterly basis, whatever basis you'd like to use as a comparison, your loans increased after the start of the pandemic compared to your activity preceding the pandemic. So if it did, you would say yes to that question. If it did not, then you would say no. All right, there's a question about renewed loans, lines of credit, and purchases, how to treat those. All right, now we have a series of questions on eligible activities with the ERP geographies, eligible activities with ERP awards. So we got a number of questions about the cost for salary and benefit of personnel providing development services or financial services. So those costs would be counted against the 25% towards development services and financial services. We also had a number of questions related to grants, what's meant by on-balance sheet grants. So this is clarified here. I see we have at least one other question on this. So the question says we administer grants that are on balance sheet. Since they're on our books, we would include them in our threshold calculation. Yes, you would. If they're on your books, if they're made with your own capital, you would include them in on-balance sheet grants. You don't need to include grants that you're really just acting as a pass-through administrator or the administrating agent for the grant on behalf of, say, a local government. That's not what's intended to be. This is if you, as a course of business, make grants, either, as a side item or for whatever reason. Should forgivable loans be classified as loans or grants? The answer to this is follow your internal accounting policies. If we're going to compare things in your application, we're going to compare it to your financial statements. So we kind of would like them to be the same. All right, there is another question about grants, I believe. So it says we're seeking clarity on how we could use ERP funds to support real estate development projects that are closely tied to our ERP recovery plans. As an example, we are redeveloping buildings in ERP-eligible geographies where we will locate our credit union branches that will also provide affordably priced space for local nonprofits and community-oriented small businesses. Can we use ERP funds to effectively make grants to these projects to fill in some of the financing gaps? I'd prefer to respond to that question via a service request as it's quite specific. And we may need some additional information. So if that's something you need clarity on, please submit a service request. All right, continuing along. we're a bank that went through a core software conversion 2 years ago. We were only able to provide accurate geographic information for our loans for the last 2 years post-conversion. We could only estimate our geocodes for the prior 3 years. Do we estimate those years or just submit the last 2 years where we can provide accurate geographic information for our loans? Please submit a service request related to this. We'll need to work with you directly on that one. Can you offer clarity on if grant-making activity outside our lending program should be included in the ERP application? I'm not totally sure I understand the question but yes, in general, if you have a grant-making program that is offered by your the applicant entity itself, not say some affiliated foundation. Yes, we are looking for that to be included in the ERP application. If that's a concern, you can reach out to us for additional information. Unregulated entity with multiple years of financial reviews is conducted by an external audit firm. Does this or does it not meet eligibility? You need to have 2 years of audited financials. There needs to be an audit opinion letter attached to your financials. That's what audited financials are. So externally reviewed financials would not qualify. Is there a list of geocodes or census tract numbers that qualify for ERP so I can compare it to our data? Yes, that's available through 2 sources. There's this list of ERP eligible geographies here. It's number 8 on our website. You can also access the data through SIMS by clicking on Tools and Resources, SIMS Mapping Tool, Public, ERP. So I'm not going to wait for SIMS to open, but that's how you get to it. There's also a bulk geocoding feature available through AMS. That can be a little finicky sometime, but in general, it should save you time. That's number 9. All right. If an organization has been a Cdfi for less than 2 years, are they ineligible to apply for that Cdfi ERP award? No. You only need to have been a certified Cdfi since as of June 24th, 2022. Now, if you have less than 2 years of an operating track record and thus don't have 2 years of audited financial statements and you're unregulated, then you would not be eligible to apply because you don't meet that requirement. However, your length of time as a CDFI is not an eligibility factor so long as you were certified by June 24th, I believe it is. All right. Similar to question M, could funds be used to build a new branch towards financial services, or would that be counted as operational support? That's something we're going to need to research to make sure we're in alignment with eligible uses in other programs, which I just don't know off the top of my head, so you can please submit a service request on that. We are getting a number of questions on race reporting, which I've not gotten to yet, so I'm going to come back to that. If we provide a grant or loan to a nonprofit, how do we determine ERP geography if they serve an area that includes ERP and non-ERP geographies? So it is based on the headquarters of that geography. That is covered, in fact, by one of these questions on geocoding. Yes, question F. All right. someone asked me a very specific question related to their native Cdfi eligibility for the program. Please submit that in the service request. I can't speak to that at this point in time. Are there points awarded for Cdfis that lapse more after March 2020 versus than before? That will be covered later. I submitted 2 questions related to geographic. So Kim LaFranchi, I did not receive either of your questions related to eligibility. Please submit them to all panelists. All right. Okay. What I'm going to do now is audible a little bit on my plan here because folks are asking questions unrelated to the sections we're covering, and I'm worried that I'm going to miss questions going back and forth. So what I'm going to do is continue to go through the document, and then I'm just going to go through the questions we receive once I'm done with the document. So I'll try to be brief. Okay, so we were here under eligible activities. They clarified what is meant by 90% of funds for program activities must be in ERP eligible geographies. This is a very important point because it will be a requirement of your assistance agreement. Please read this question, question P. So if you are planning to use a Cdfi ERP award for loan loss reserves or capital reserves, you'll be required to track financial products and or grants supported with those reserves and report on them. Another question relative to intermediary lenders, R and S, so please look at those if you do lend to other Cdfis. Policy priorities. We got a series of questions on policy priorities. If we can achieve multiple policy priorities, which one should we select? There's no preference among the policy priorities. I would select the one that you think you are able to achieve at the highest level. This question U provides specific clarifications related to how you can allocate transactions across policy priorities. And B offers some clarification on the multiplier policy priority. All right, so if you have a 12/31 fiscal year and you don't have a completed audit for that, your most recent historic fiscal year for the purposes of completing the tables is still going to be FY 2021. And you're just going to put in unaudited financial information for that, and then audited financial information for FY 20 and 19. As I mentioned earlier, regulated institutions are exempt from the audit requirements. Question why. Your projections should encompass all of your planned activities, not just your ERP activities. There's some clarification on org charts and the attachments. There is additional information on restrictions on using a Cdfi ERP with other award programs. The original FAQ has the requirement that you can't use ERP funds to meet PG&Ms under the FA, SDLP, or RRP programs. So this is related to BEA, CMF, BGP, or NMTC. We got a number of questions related to that using ERP with Cdfi FA objectives. And I do want to restate that you cannot use any of your Cdfi ERP award activities towards meeting your FA objectives. They're going to need to be coded separately in reporting, and they'd be excluded. There are questions related to how grant making impacts certification. Please review those. If you have questions about those, we may have to direct them to the certification office. We got a number of questions about potential data collection and race. So I'm just going to read this one because we got so many. The NOFA states that we intend to require recipients to collect and report data on race and ethnicity of borrowers and/or beneficiaries of Cdfi ERP. This will apply to all eligible activities with the exception of operational support activities. For financial products and grants supported with Cdfi ERP awards, reporting will entail providing data about borrowers and recipients of loans, investments, and grants. For financial products and grants supported by loan loss reserve or capital reserve funded with the Cdfi ERP award, reporting will include all recipients of loans, investments, and grants supported by these reserves. For financial and development services, reporting will include race and ethnicity data for recipients of those services. That will be a requirement, and that's important. Beneficiaries are end users of certain types of facilities. Tracking and reporting on race data for beneficiaries would be in addition to tracking race data on borrowers. This is something we're still trying to work out, and we'll issue further guidance on how to collect and report on this data in the agreement. If you have not historically collected data on race or ethnicity of your borrowers, or if there's other data the application asks for that you haven't historically collected, in general, do not estimate it. You have to, provide us the data you have, not estimated data. Can't use proxy data. So please use this. Please review this if you have questions related to that. The SF424 deadline has passed, so this question is not very relevant at this point in time. We've got a number of questions about the 7 track record criteria. For reference, the NOFA states, in further pursuit of program objectives, the Cdfi ERP will prioritize applicants with a track record of making loans, grants, or investments to LMI minority communities that are also ERP eligible geographies, making loans, grants, and investments to minorities that have significant unmet capital or financial services need, making loans, grants, or investments in PPCs, native areas, or U.S. territories, making loans, grants, or investments to small businesses with less than $1 million in gross annual revenue, or to small farms with an emphasis on small businesses with less than $100,000 gross annual revenue, increase lending in ERP eligible geographies, creating new financial products and grants to support ERP eligible geographies, and expanding into previously unserved ERP eligible geographies. So these are grouped separately in terms of the evaluation. So the first 4 of the 7 criteria have equal priority as outlined in questions 11B and C of the application instructions. The applicant's score will be based on the highest percentage of the 8 responses provided in question 11B and 11C. The other 3 criteria listed, which are basically related to whether you've increased activity in some way, shape, or form in ERP eligible geographies in response to the pandemic, are separately evaluated, and they're weighted less. So the idea, the more important one is getting one of the first 4 at a high level. Again, there's a second question about policy priorities. We don't have any preference between priorities. All right. There are various questions about award request and determination. I'm not going to go through them in depth because we're getting a number of questions, so I want to have time for that. Performance goals, we've got another question about these. Your policy priority will be selected will be a condition of your agreement. This provides more information on that. There is not a PG&M related to increased lending in ERP eligible geographies unless you selected that policy priority. Other questions about reporting that we recommend you review. And then there's also a definition of minority owned or controlled businesses that we recommend you review. So now I'm going to move to the questions. I'm going to start at the beginning so I can try to get everything. Do you have a sense from grants.gov how many organizations are going to apply? I don't have that information right now. So there's a question on the certification point about grant making is not allowed to count as a financial product and won't count as a grant-related activity, but it is eligible under ERP. So the point we're trying to make in question CC and DD is that for your certification purposes, grant making is not considered a financial product. So you want to be careful about how much grant making you do so you don't lose, affect your predominance test for certification. But from an ERP perspective, you are able to use as much of your ERP award funds as you want for grant making. So those are things you just need to track internally. All right, we got a question. We typically rely on our borrowers to collect and provide data on beneficiaries. If we are required to collect beneficiary race and ethnicity data for ERP funds, what should we do about the lack of protection for borrowers in the statute? Again, these requirements will be spelled out in the assistance agreement. Collection of data on beneficiaries is still being determined relative to a number of different factors. So I can't say any more on that at this point in time. But the important thing is you will need to collect race data on your borrowers. And again, there'll be more data on that later. We got a question as to whether funds to build a new branch could count towards financial services. I think I said we need to research that. Although we can ask a client to provide their race and ethnicity data, what do we do if a client refuses to provide it? Does that make them ineligible to receive products or services? We will provide specific guidance on how we would like you to collect race data. There will not be a requirement that you refuse service to anyone who refuses to provide race data. That would be discriminatory, and that's not what we want. But there may be alternate ways that we ask you to impute race data. We're still working on that. If we provide a grant or loan to a nonprofit, how do we determine ERP eligible geography if they serve an area? Again, you're going to look at their headquarters. It does not matter what area the nonprofit serves. There were a couple of questions we got that are really specific related to one organization's eligibility questions. Please submit those via service request so we can respond to them in detail. Are there points awarded for Cdfis that lent more after March 2020 than before? Let me pull up the application instructions and go to, this is question 11. I know this is small. So, yeah, we're asking, these three questions are kind of evaluated collectively. And they're questions related to how you've responded to the COVID-19 pandemic. So if you can say yes, that you responded either by increasing your volume of activity, expanding operations, offering new financial product services or development services, then you may be eligible to score slightly more favorably. But these are not main criteria. All right, so there's a question related to capital reserves. And credit unions, that's something we're still researching, and we may provide further guidance. Please submit a service request. Okay. 90% of development service funding have to be deployed in ERP eligible areas. If so, what is tracked? For example, how to determine staff time. So that is outlined in this FAQ, which I encourage you to review in full. Where's the 90%? P. So we'll track whether 90% of development services has been deployed in eligible areas based on the address of the people receiving the development services, not the staff time. All right, if grants are on our books but earmarked as pass-through, should they be counted as on balance sheet? I don't know what that means because I am not an accountant by training. If you need more specific guidance, you can follow up with a service request. For development services, do we need the participant address of where they live or where the project is located or where the training is hosted in an ERP eligible geography? How do we decide how to prove service support located in ERP eligible area? In general, we're looking for, at this point in time, we are looking for the address of the recipient or the project that development services is supporting or the business. I think we will consider whether there's any other way to measure the geographic impact of the development service and provide that clarification in the assistance agreement. All right. When calculating pre and post March 2020, should we look at 3 years prior to February 2020 and then April? Do we include March 2020 in the proceeding or post or exclude March 2020? So the question asks, whether you include it in the pre or the post. I would just exclude March 2020 is the way I read this question as being as written. So if you've already done it a different way, I think that's fine. Just be clear as to how you calculated it in the narrative. It does not really matter all that much as to whether you include March 2020 in the pre, post, or exclude it altogether. All right. Everett White has written a very long hypothetical that it would be challenging to attempt to answer in the time that we have remaining. So if that is important, please submit it via service request. If we are using some of the ERP funds, it says 90% of the clients must be located in ERP-eligible geographies. So again, it's not based on staff time. It doesn't really have anything to do with staff time. It's just how much development services provided by that staff person who've been supported with ERP-eligible geographies. So you're going to need to think about how you're designing your development services to target folks within those geographies. So again, someone asked a question about building a new branch and whether that can count towards financial services. Please submit a service request. We will respond to you once we're able to research. A couple other questions I want to make sure that I get to. Can we include lending from our Cdfi to an affordable housing project where we are a partner? You need more details on the specific. There is nothing necessarily within the program at this point in time that prohibits you lending to projects where you have, an affiliate relationship. There are some requirements in your Cdfi certification related to arm's length lending that you need to be mindful of. So if you have a specific question, I think it'd be better to go over that via service request rather than at this open forum. Does AMIS take your geocodes and determine if more than 30% of the loans closed are in eligible census tracts, or does the organization need to determine the percentage itself using the list of census tracts provided? So the organization, so you can use AMIS using the bulk geocoding tool to determine what census tracts your addresses are located in. Once you've done that, you need to determine whether 30% of the tracts are located in the ERP-eligible census tracts based on the list we provided. We got another question. The difference in possible amounts approved can range from $500,000 to $15 million. If we request $15 million and the fund approves us $2 million, the business plan and strategies relate to $15 million is significantly different than $2 million. How are performance metrics adjusted in this scenario? Your performance metrics are tied to a percentage of the award you actually receive or a multiplier of the award you actually receive. So they adjust automatically based on that. So for example, if one of your performance metrics is that you're going to invest 75% of your loans made with ERP to persistent poverty counties, then you applied for $15 million and you only get $2 million, then you'd still be held to using 75% of your loans in persistent poverty counties. It would just be $2 million worth of loans. Okay. Again, the development services is going to be based on the project track, not necessarily the headquarters if there's an identified project track. Sorry, I'm going through these. I'm trying to get to as many as possible, so I may not read all the questions. If we make loans to tribes, do we count this as a loan to a business, nonprofit, or an individual? In general, not being an individual, we're trying to see a little bit on how this was reported, but I think please submit a service request and we'll respond to that if anyone has that specific question. All right, are investments in ERP areas, securities such as CDs, notes, and mortgage-backed securities, etc., considered part of the ERP if the other institution is a CDFI and or low-income designated? I do not understand how that question relates, whether it's related to track record of activities or projected activities with an award. So if that is a question you need an answer to, please submit a service request with some additional detail. Questions related to scoring. I am not going to provide any more detail on scoring beyond what's currently provided in the NOFA. We are not going to share at this point in time how many organizations submitted SF424s. So Guidance G indicates that two methods intermediaries can use to determine prior ERP eligible geographies. But can we use both of these means to determine investments in ERP eligibility or just the end user demographic geographic information? In general, I think the approach we've been thinking was you would do one or the other based on the data you have available. If that's a problem, please submit a service request and we can provide more specific guidance relative to your situation. Similarly, in determining data for Table D, can we use methods to derive the data required? Where we have not collected end user data where not necessary. We are asking you not to derive any data reported in this application. If you need more specific guidance on your specific scenario, please submit a service request. Question 12, will inputting a higher percentage make for a more competitive applications? Are percentages above 100% allowed? The maximum allowable input for question 12 on the percentages is 100%, because it's going to be measured as a percentage of your ERP activities. Okay, so you can't have above 100% of your ERP activities. In general, inputting a higher percentage will make for a more competitive application. Can't tell you specifically what percentage. Well, let me rephrase that. Again, as I've talked about in previous webinars, competition for this program is going to be more about the amount received in terms of size of the award rather than whether folks get an award. While it's not RRP where everyone who applies gets a formula award, folks, so long as they submit, if you review Section 5 of the NOFA, you'll see that most of the evaluation is based on determining the size of the award amount. And then there are some points in which if the application is seriously deficient in terms of strategy, in terms of some organizational capacity issue, eligibility, that application may be denied an award. So when I say more competitive, when someone says more competitive, it really means you might be eligible for a larger award if you commit to a higher percent. If we use ERP for loan loss reserve on a loan product, can we use FA dollars for the actual lending capital for the same loan products? No, because there is no way you'd be able to attribute those loans to both FA. Well, let me answer that question. So you cannot attribute loans made that are supported by an ERP loan loss reserve to your FA performance goals and metrics. However, but you could use FA dollars, you just couldn't count those loans towards meeting any of your FA performance goals because of the way FA awards are structured, where you need to invest an equivalent amount of the award to other sources. So in general, I think that would be problematic, but there are ways you could do it without running afoul of our requirements. If that's something you really need to do, please come talk to us and ask us questions via service request so we can provide more specific guidance. All right. There's a question related to audit requirements for the ERP program as compared to FA or RRP program eligibility. ERP program awards are larger There are specific and more stringent compliance requirements with the ERP program compared to both RRP and FA. And so we instituted an audit requirement to ensure that the funds would be used effectively and that the organizations that were funding had capacity to manage the award requirements. Again, if folks have specific questions related to intermediaries, please submit them via service request. I'm going to probably try to go through as many questions as I can in the next 10 minutes, and then we're going to need to wrap up. So I'm just going to keep going. Again, we've gotten questions about capital reserves. That seems to be an issue specific to a certain applicant type, and we are working on providing additional guidance. So we will provide guidance through service requests to folks who have questions about using capital reserves. But right now, the FAQ guidance holds, which is that loans supported through those reserves would need to be tracked as ERP eligible. Do Table C projections become part of the assistance agreement? E.g., the amount in the specific year becomes the PG&M goal for the first year, et cetera. No, we do. There are specific timeframes for expending the award that are outlined in the NOFA. Please be sure to review the NOFA. If you've not already, the requirement is that 60% of the award funds are expended by year 3, 80% by year 4, and 100% by year 5. The information in Table C related to the projections is primarily used for us to do payment planning in terms of identifying how much the first payment for the award should be and kind of tracking when, in terms of understanding the business strategy, how funds will be drawn down. All right, question 13D, as it relates to data we request on borrowers, will recipients of ERP be required to report this data to the Cdfi fund? Certain data may be required to be reported to the Cdfi fund. In general, we don't want to collect any personally identifiable information. So, it depends on whether you're making consumer loans. There's a certain reporting form for consumer loans, and then there's a certain reporting form for other loans. You can review our existing transaction level report guidance on our website. That is what's currently completed by people who have a financial assistance award and who have RRP awards. So when you are reporting on ERP, you will just be completing that same report, the TLR. However, we may add some number of data points to the CLR or make certain data points conditionally required if the loan is related to an ERP award. We're still working that out. Will the race ethnicity be required for all lending or just the ERP award amount? It will just be for the ERP award amount or for Race and ethnicity requirement will be related to all loans will be required for all loans related to an ERP award. So in general, that will be loans or grants made with ERP funds. It would also be loans or grants supported by reserves for ERP funds. Regarding race and ethnicity, how will an awardee report on projects that are not yet completed within the 5-year performance period for ERP? Additional guidance on reporting will be provided at the time the assistance agreement is released and later. again, I know there are many questions about reporting of race and ethnicity. The supplemental FAQ contains all the information that we're able to provide on that this time. By the time the assistance agreement is released, we will be, and award decisions are made, we'll be able to provide more information about how we're approaching that. You already answered this. There's some of these questions that I don't totally understand, so if this format is not necessarily the best, but if I'm missing your question, please submit a service request. Can you share the question that was about capital reserves, so at least we know? So the guidance in the FAQ states that 90% of funds must be, for the program, must be in ERP eligible geographies. So the guidance we're providing as to how that applies to capital reserves is that for loan loss reserves and capital reserves, 90% of the financial product and or grant supported by these reserves must be provided in ERP eligible geographies. And if you are using the ERP award for loan loss reserves or capital reserves, you need to track, the requirements on data tracking related to race and ethnicity will flow to those loans. So the question related to capital reserves is typically, we have not in the past, certain organizations don't tend to think of their capital reserves as being allocated to specific lending or activities. So the key issue here is not what capital is funding the lending, but what activity is being supported by the reserve. So example, if you make a loan loss reserve and you want to designate it for ERP funds, you might want to have an ERP loan pool, and loans made out of that loan pool would need to be funded by ERP. So, loans made out of that loan pool would count as ERP loans. Sorry, I think I may have headset issues. Loans made out of an ERP loan pool would be counted as ERP loans, even if there's no ERP funding directly in those loans, even if they're only being supported by loan loss reserves. And so those loans are then subject to those requirements. So that would be true of capital reserves as well. And then there are questions as to how you could allocate capital reserves to certain activities. And so we're doing additional research on that. I'm going to do the best I can. We've got a few more questions. So to confirm, lending outside of our target market, even if it's an ERP eligible geography, can impact our 60% threshold for certification? Yes. Not all lending in your ERP eligible geographies is necessarily target market lending. You need to be mindful of your target market when deploying funds through this program. What are the most important criteria with regards to scoring? The Notice of Funds Availability, Section 5, provides all the information that we're able to provide on scoring, in addition to tips throughout the application. I think I heard you say the fund may compare loan data in ERP tables with the latest TLR submission to see if they are consistent. Can you elaborate on that process? What happens if the numbers are inconsistent? Will the institution be given an opportunity to explain the inconsistency? E.g., the institution made improvements through its data collection process or performed manual review to attain additional data points for ERP, et cetera. Yes, so we will be doing some sort of process to verify eligibility data. We'll leverage TLR data to the extent possible as necessary to reduce the burden on applicants
So we are encouraging all applicants, and we'll try to make this clear, to retain their records for how they determine they are eligible for Cdfi ERP. So that if we have any questions about how they met the 30% requirement and we need to request additional clarification, we'll do that. At this point in time, we're not anticipating, like, if there are any issues with any sort of application data that we need clarity on, we would go back to the recipient for additional clarity before we made any determinations based on that. How do we submit a service request? All right, I'm going to demo that because I think that's a good place to end. So again, since I have this open, I am going to show again that this is the bulk address geocoding manual. So if you're interested in learning how to do that, there is a video as part of that. So how do we submit a service request? So you're going to go to AMIS, and there should be instructions. I'm not going to log into AMIS if I can avoid it. So we go to amis.cdfi.gov, and then there are various training materials. And then there is one called How to Create a Service Request in Lightning. So this is, again, amis.cdfifund.gov. And then you navigate to AMIS training materials. And then there's a document called How to Create Service Request in Lightning. And it will take you to a handy YouTube video, which I am not going to watch with you guys. But there is a tab called Service Request that you're going to click on. So for convenience, I am going to copy the link into the chat.
Dan, this is Marcia. Hello, everybody. I do recognize that some of the questions that people put in the chat are service requests already that we're working on the answers to. I don't see any other questions that were asked that we can answer at this moment. I think there are some specific new ones that are specific that we'll be happy to help you with. And as was noted, we slided until 2:30, but I don't see any other questions. So calling once, calling twice. I would ask you to, if there's any burning thing that you think would be applicable to all, we'll try to answer it right now, or we can wrap up. I think you all asked really good questions, and as you know, we are working diligently to figure out the answers to some things that are still to be determined, particularly about the reporting. I know some of this is new to some types of CDFIs more than others, staying with the intent of the program, the reasons why we're requiring certain kinds of reporting, are driven by that. Do we have any other questions?
I did get one more question.
Go ahead.
So in calculating the maximum award request, can we only look at lending in our target market and lending in ERP-eligible geographies? So in calculating your maximum award request, the system, AMIS does it for you. It's going to be based on all of your activity in the last 5 years, not just lending in your target market. So.
Okay.
I also got a question about the difference between loan loss reserves and capital reserves. Capital reserves really only apply to regulated institutions. Loan loss reserves, would apply to all CDFIs, way by regulators. So if your organization is not a regulated institution that currently has capital reserves, you probably don't need to worry about that.
All
but
right.
it's certainly an important issue to those groups, so we're working on trying to clarify that.
Right, and we did put out an FAQ. See, there's some intermediary lending questions that we have put out guidance on, but and we do have some that are in the queue on for service requests. Okay, anybody else? I don't see any more. Okay, so thank you everybody for participating today, and I do encourage you, we have until September 22nd, I do encourage you to continue to send into your questions that you need answered to help submit the best application that you can, and, you know, we will do our best to help you as much as we can. But I think that's probably going to cover it for now. I don't see anything else that we can answer right now. So thank you, everybody, for participating, and looking forward to receiving your applications. Okay.
That
let's end
today's
here.
Conference. Thank you for participating. You may disconnect at this time.